The question is Agile dead?
I really think there's so much bad Scrum out there, and people just believe this is good, and they have no idea how it really looks like. What would be my definition of Agile is not a certain framework. It's an organization's ability to deal with uncertainty.
It demands a lot of vulnerability to make that transparent in a company, that you have these kind of fears.
We can debate which frameworks are useful and which ones could be harmful, but in general, a framework just gives you, right, within a frame, the idea of how work can be done.
There's others which are really disappointed that there's nothing really new coming up in the last 20 years, saying the Agile Manifesto is already an adult right now. Yeah? It's 21 or older even.
If you're facing less uncertainty than a company like Google was facing a decade ago, but do you have to stick to the 3-month cycle? No, you don't. My most loved quote from Mike Tyson is, everybody has a plan until you punch them in the mouth.
Yeah, mine too.
And every startup founder has experienced it. Hello everyone, welcome back to our Agile Insights. Today we're going to run an experiment. We're actually going to run this session in a bit of a different format. I'm being joined today by my latest colleague, Jan Neudecker. And Jan will mostly take over the part of the interviewer, and I will be the interviewee. And we'll just go through a conversation, which won't be cut in any way. So you'll get it raw and uncut from us. And Jan, what kind of topic have you brought with yourself today? What are we going to talk about?
Yeah, good question. Well, I'm quite active on LinkedIn. And when I browse through the Agile groups in my timelines lately, there's one topic which really is popping up more and more in the last days. And the question is Agile dead? And a lot of people are proclaiming it is. Some argue against it. And I think this is a trending topic. And I would love to get your insights on that and see, what's your take on it? And where will this movement go in the next years? That would be the topic for the day.
Yeah, an interesting one. Let's start.
Yeah.
So what do people say? Why do they believe Agile is dead? What is their argument?
I think there's different angles from which they're coming. So there's one group which sees Agile implementations like Scrum implementations not being successful, being rolled back. Then there's others which are really disappointed that there's nothing really new coming up in the last 20 years, saying the Agile Manifesto is already an adult right now. Yeah? It's 21 or older even. And what's next? So they're waiting for some revelations. It's like when Apple reveals the next iPhone and everyone's complaining that it's not a revolution, but it's still a working product from my perspective. Those are the two different stances I perceive out there. And I think I would like to start with the first one. All those not successful implementations, is that really a sign telling us Agile is dead? And my first question in that regards would be, what actually is Agile to you? And why should companies work in an Agile way?
Yeah. So I see those posts too. And they have been around for now many years. It might be that they show up more often in the past, like several weeks or month. But ever since I started this journey, which is now about 12, 13 years ago, people have been saying, no, Agile, it's not going to last any longer. I actually remember it was, I think, in 2014 or 15, something like that, probably 14. I had a lady come in for an interview, Diana. And Diana, to this date, we collaborate, we do a lot of work with her. And she was going to interview for a full-time position in our company. And she had recently been in one of my Scrum Master trainings. So that's how she and I got to know each other. And Diana back then asked me, so Sohrab, how long do you think this Agile thing is going to be a thing? And I briefly thought about it. And I said, you know what, Diana, I think I will retire working on this topic. And she looked at me, and then I clarified, and I don't mean by that I'm going to make so much money and retire in 5 years from now, but that this will keep me busy for the rest of my career, right? Mm-hmm. Just to make sure that we talk about the same thing, what retirement is. And this goes back to, you asked, like, what would be my definition of Agile? is not a certain framework. It's an organization's ability to deal with uncertainty. Now, why do I say I will retire with this? Because I believe uncertainty is only going up. And it's not, and I said this long before there was a pandemic. I said this long before there were the wars that we're currently seeing in Ukraine and Palestine and all that. So long before these kind of things, and I'm not the only person who says this, there's actually research behind it, that the pace of change is going up. Doesn't matter whether it's linear going up or whether it's exponential going up. If it's exponential, it's even worse. But the pace of change is increasing. And based on that, uncertainty is increasing. So an organization that has had a stable business model now needs to build the capability of, to some extent, redefining itself, redefining its customer base, its business models, its value propositions, all of that. And Agile for me is actually the capability to do all of that. Now, whether you use certain frameworks, that can be up for debate. But I think the overall concept that organizations need to become more agile, more adaptive, more inventive, I think that's long from being dead. And probably it will never die. Actually, to the contrary, it will become more and more important. How do you look at that?
I kind of have the same view. So when people tell me Agile is dead or we don't need Scrum anymore, so there's a lot of Scrum bashing also lately because it's one of the most popular Agile frameworks. I'll get to why I think that is later, maybe. I see it as you describe it as well. It's a capability of being able to deal with change, and change is just going to get more, as you explained. And my usual response is like, okay, so did you build a time machine right now? So can you predict the future? Do you have any glass bowl which helps you to anticipate immediately what will be the right steps to do and what products to build to be successful? Because if not, I think the need to iterate and really learn fast and also be able to pivot. Well, we Germans, we're known for liking our plans, making plans, execute them. I like that too. So in my private life, I tend to overplan the simplest things like vacations with friends and stuff. But especially in business life, I think there is no such thing as certainty when it comes to we're building a new product. We need to figure out on how we can keep our business profitable in the next years. So this capability of being able to change, from my perspective, is still there. And that's like my core view. What I find interesting to dive deeper into is why, and I think most CEOs and most companies would agree if we tell them that, or if we say this is what Agile is all about, they would probably be like this meme on the internet, like, yeah, shut up and take my money, I want that. Why do we have this bad atmosphere around it going on right now? What do you think is causing that?
So you opened by asking the question how I define Agile, and you shared now how you define it. I think the point is many people don't share that definition. So if they believe that Agile is equal to Scrum, just as one example, or Agile is equal to SAFe, right? Scaled Agile Framework, whatever. You could make an argument that if there is less appetite for Scrum, or if there is less appetite for SAFe, right? Well, Agile is dying. But as you and I define it as the organization's ability, maybe even an individual's ability to deal with change or to deal with uncertainty, then with the increasement of uncertainty and thus the need for change, Agile is far from dying. Now, with regards to the argument of many people, the frustrations that they have, etc., I believe this is mostly due to many of these transformation initiatives being run in I won't sugarcoat it, in a really bad way. In a really, really bad way. Where the implementation of certain frameworks is sold as basically the cure for an organization's inability to innovate. And I'm not going to go as far and say you don't need frameworks. I actually believe we need frameworks. We can debate which frameworks are useful and which ones could be harmful. But in general, a framework just gives you, right, within a frame, the idea of how work can be done. That's the intention of a framework and helping people who are used to work in a certain way imagine a new way of working. I think that's very important. And that's what people like you and I can contribute to organization. But that is not sufficient. So it goes way beyond how we work. It goes way beyond what kind of meetings we have. It goes way beyond to whom we address which accountability, right? Or responsibility, or whatever term you want to use here. It's really about how we approach things and whether we believe that, I always call the beginning of any product development phase or any project as our dumbest point in time. Whether we believe that at our dumbest point in time, we have all the answers, or whether we admit to ourselves that we don't have all the answers. And then think about, so if we don't have all the answers, what is it that we have to do, right? So that admittance, I think, is important. And you mentioned that this might be difficult for people or organizations in Germany. I honestly believe this is difficult for everybody.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Because as human beings, we seek certainty, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this great book from General Stanley McChrystal, Team of Teams, where he talks about VUCA, like where this came from, how the US military came to this term. But he also has this quote, which probably many of our listeners have heard, is you need to become comfortable being uncomfortable, right? He's not German. He's American. And I see the same thing all over the world. Actually, at one point, I was on a plane from London back to Cologne, and there was a gentleman from, I think he was from Nigeria or Ghana. I don't remember, right? But from one of those two countries. And he seemed to be like a very successful businessman. So I engaged in a conversation. I was much, much younger than he was. And I started asking him, like, what kind of like tips, right? Pieces of advice do you have for someone my age? And back then I had never heard of Stanley McChrystal. I had never heard of Agile, but he was the first one who shared this, be comfortable being uncomfortable with me. And so if that made sense for someone from West Africa, right? We know it makes sense for people in Germany. McChrystal says it on behalf of like people in the US and the US military. So I think this is a very human trait that we are uncomfortable with uncertainty, but we need to make that change. And the process that certain frameworks lay out, I'm going to close this monologue then. I think that process, the inspect and adapt cycles, they are just something that help us become comfortable being uncomfortable. So that's how I look at it a bit, but many people don't. And that's where the frustration comes from.
I'm totally with you that this is not just a German problem. I think looking back at what this country has been built on in the past 50, 60 years, it's been the big industrial revolution, automotive, and those were all environments where planning was really helpful for a very, very long time. And I think that's a part of the puzzle, that you also need to get into a state of mind where you accept that what was working for you and what helped you be really successful yesterday might be the thing which will end your business tomorrow. And as you said, change is something we humans fear. There's a lot of research around that as well. And it's a totally natural thing, which doesn't make it easier for us, of course, to deal with that. But I think making that more transparent is one of the key things in companies. So when I give trainings on Scrum or Agile, whatever it is, I usually talk about a model from Virginia Satir, the change curve. It's a model. All models are wrong, of course, but I think just to make transparent to people that it's a very natural feeling to be discomfortable with change, or maybe even to be afraid, is helpful. Yeah, and of course, it demands a lot of vulnerability to make that transparent in a company, that you have these kind of fears. But I think that's something which will definitely help us in the future to deal better with that. And that's from my perspective also playing a lot into this entire discussion on where can it be helpful, how can we roll this out better, or roll out. I don't like that term, but how can we all get more comfortable with being uncomfortable? Yeah.
Now, I would add one thing. You mentioned what made you successful yesterday might be the reason why you while you die in the future. This could be the case. Sometimes the abilities that you or the capabilities that you built won't be the reason that you are not going to be successful in the future. But they just help you maintain whatever you have achieved so far, right? And they don't necessarily help you to achieve the new goals that you have. That's one piece. And I, being from a medical background, provide the following analogy. As a surgeon, right, you always need to know how to work with a scalpel. It's just part of your repertoire, right? Mm-hmm. You can think about the same way in terms of planning. Every organization needs to have the ability to do planning. Now, the question is, do we plan to replan or do we just plan, right? Mm-hmm. And the same thing, again, you can go back to the surgeon. Does that surgeon only have the ability to use a scalpel, or does that surgeon also extend their set of capabilities, the tool set that they have, to be able to do microinvasive surgery, right? They might still be successful with the traditional way of using a scalpel, cutting open the patient, but they might be more successful if they extend their set of capabilities so that they're able to do microinvasive surgery. And in organizations, I haven't seen an organization yet where in every single department, unit, whatever you want to call it, they need to bring in or replace whatever they've been doing today and however they've been doing things today with new frameworks, new tools, etc. But in every organization, I have seen the need for this particular toolkit that we associate with the agile space, quote unquote, in doing innovative projects, in doing all that kind of stuff. So it's really about the extension of your toolkit, of your abilities in order to achieve the goals that you set for yourself going into the future.
I think what you just mentioned is also a major point on why we see all this frustration out in the world nowadays about Agile, because some companies try to roll it out everywhere. Probably you also had these client requests, make us Agile, and when you asked why, they didn't really give you a good answer, and they were trying to solve problems with Agile which don't even require it. So I personally, I'm not a big fan of this proclaimed, and not a nice word, but sometimes it seems like a war between waterfall or classical approaches and Agile, which from my perspective is completely unnecessary because both are helpful in the right environment. And I think people have, or companies have tried to just roll out this new way of working because that's how you do things today, everywhere, without really questioning in what type of environment are we currently dealing in. So another example, when especially hardware companies come and say you can't build cars with Agile. Well, we both know that this is not really true because we know people that have done that. If you look at the guys at Wikispeed, I think the major point is that the product development, the research itself, that can be done in a really agile way. And afterwards, the production, the scaling, there our classical approaches are really helpful. And I think that's a skill which is not very widespread yet in companies, to really distinguish between, are we dealing with problems which are in an environment where agile approaches can help us, or are we rather in an environment, and I've seen that in all bigger corporations, there is certain functions where you won't need agile, it will just make things worse. And from my perspective, that is one big piece of the puzzle on why we read these posts, that agile is dead, and which caused a lot of frustration. Or what's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned something interesting, that they just do it or run out certain frameworks, roll out certain frameworks because everybody else is doing it. Mm-hmm. That's usually like the worst thing that one can do, right? And it applies to personal life the same way it applies to business. If you're like, oh, I'm going to buy, I don't know, a new shirt because everybody else is wearing that shirt, it might not fit like your body type and the type of sports that you do and all of that. You have to understand, like, why is one particular person buying that shirt and what kind of value could it add to me? And the same thing applies to ways of working. I've been, in the past 2 weeks, running OKR implementation sessions, like 90 minutes long, 60 to 90 minutes long for one of our clients. And I always emphasize in those sessions that although, for example, a company like Google initially used to run OKRs in a 3-month cycle, so in a quarterly cycle, you don't have to do that. Because the intention to do it in a quarterly cycle is based on the level of uncertainty that you're facing. You can still apply OKRs if you're facing less uncertainty than a company like Google was facing a decade ago. But do you have to stick to the 3-month cycle? No, you don't, right? You could do annual OKRs. And guess what? A company like Google today, with less uncertainty in terms of their core business model being search, does not do quarterly OKRs in every single department, let alone for every single person, let alone for organization strategy, right? They run annual or sometimes even 2-year OKRs. And this is very important to always look at what is your context, what is the set of problems that you're facing, or where are the things that you want to improve, and then select, again, from that toolkit that you now have in front of you, select those things that could be of help to you. Now, this goes completely against many of the people on the other end of the spectrum, right? Where they say, if you don't do everything by the book, you're not agile. No, you could do Scrum not by the book, still be very agile, but yes, you're not doing Scrum, and that's fine. You don't have to, right? I compare that to, you can play football or you can play rugby. Each of them is a different type of sport, right? Each of them has their own set of rules. But if your intention is to have fun and stay fit, both of them are valuable. And actually, there's maybe a million other things you can do in order to have fun and stay fit. So as an organization, if you want to be agile, if that's the goal, there are many ways to get there. The frameworks are one aspect of it, and you don't even have to do it 100% by the book.
True, yeah. Good point. Yeah, staying fit and having fun. I would definitely recommend riding bicycles, but that's another story for another talk.
I'm not sure if that's so much fun, at least not for me. Because for me, in order to have fun with sports, I need 2 things. It needs to be a competition, and ideally it's a team competition, not one-on-one. So I do sometimes enjoy tennis. But the second thing, there needs to be a ball involved, in my case. So I remember, like, from very early on in school, and just a side note, right? When we were supposed to just run 100 meters, I couldn't care less. No, throw in a ball, and I was like the fastest running after the ball. So competition, ideally team, plus a ball, that's fun. And yeah, running a bicycle or riding a bicycle, not so much for me, at least. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'll convince you at some other point in time when we have some more time to talk about that. And I'll get you on a bike, I'm pretty sure on that. You mentioned another point, which I also wanted to talk about. And I hear that very often, like Scrum is so dogmatic and Scrum by the book doesn't work. And that's really closely coupled to this entire discussion of Agile is Dead. So whenever I hear that, like Scrum is so dogmatic, or we don't need Scrum by the book, and so on and so forth, my first thought and response to that is usually, okay, so we don't need to talk anymore about what we want to achieve. We don't need plans anymore, and we don't need to check anymore if these plans are actually working, and then adapt based on what we've learned. Because from my point of view, that's all Scrum is telling you, and that's what Agile is all about. So I'm always really confused when that comes up, and everyone tells me how dogmatic Scrum is. Why do you think Scrum has such a bad name in so many people's head?
I think it has primarily a bad name with people who have never experienced it. I really think that's the case. I really think there's so much bad Scrum out there, and people just believe this is good, and they have no idea how it really looks like. Mm-hmm. I remember early on, as part of my journey to become a CST, I was very fortunate to co-train with many people, one of them being Jeff Sutherland himself. And Jeff in one of the lunches and then later dinners we had, I asked him, I was like, so Jeff, how do we fight waterfall? Right? I was very young, and that he's like, we don't need to. We don't need to. We need to fight bad Scrum. And back then I didn't get it. Maybe because I hadn't seen bad Scrum that much. I implemented Scrum the first time within the context of my parents' company. And because we were allowed to do everything the way we wanted, we were actually able to create quite a good Scrum. So my very first encounter, although we were not experienced with the framework, was a very positive one. And it helped us really change how we worked. And we really took continuous improvement seriously. And because of the organization allowing us, right, my father was the CEO, to make all the changes that we wanted, for example, moving from on-premise to cloud-based infrastructure and all of that kind of thing, I was like, this is brilliant, right? This is magic. This helps us get our work done, do it in a structured way, have fun as we go, do it, right? All of that kind of thing. But I think the vast majority of people, based on the organizations that I go into, they've never seen real Scrum in action. And I'll give you an example, Jan. Remember, yesterday you and I had a conversation with one of our clients. Mm-hmm. And people in that organization, many of them cannot imagine that a team of 6 to 8 people can actually build and run and maintain a product. They can't. Why? Because they've never seen it, right? There's this saying, if I don't see it, I don't believe it. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. A lot of people operate like that, right? And it just goes beyond their imagination. But if they've seen bad Scrum, they're like, this thing doesn't work. It doesn't work in our organization. How can it work in any organization? It goes beyond their imagination. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good point. So it sounds a bit like Scrum is like the Sasquatch. Everyone talks about it. No one's really seen it yet.
We have seen it, right?
We have seen it, definitely. We have seen it. But I get the point and I fully agree. So while you were talking, I had to think about a training I've given, I think 2 or 3 years ago. It was an English-speaking training with a group of very nice people. And one of the first things in the check-in, one person voiced was, I don't like this Agile. It's all bullshit. It doesn't work. Sorry, please pardon my French. I'm just citing here. And well, when I was younger, those people in trainings made me nervous when I identified them early on. And back then I already was a bit more relaxed and was like, okay, we're going to have a lot of fun, because exactly what you just said was my assumption. Like, probably you've never seen it. And this was not a classical 2-day training. So it spanned over 4 days, split in 2 days with a 4-week break in between. And after the first block already, that person left and thanked me for, I learned so much here. And now I really start to understand that what I was referring to had nothing to do with what actually is defined as Agile and Scrum. And he became one of the biggest fans of that entire class in the end. So I think that's absolutely true. And probably Scrum being not dogmatic, which it is not from my point of view, is helpful and a threat at the same time, which we maybe can talk about as well. I think it wouldn't work any other way, because every context is highly individual, and Scrum is not telling you anything about how you need to run certain mechanisms. It's just highlighting why you need them and why they're important. And I think none of them is really sugarcoating or something which you don't need. But on the other hand, this freedom, and you don't have a playbook to roll everything out, also requires, first of all, knowledge and deep understanding about it, which, and I'm honest about that, it took me a while to get it as well. So if I look back what I did with teams like 7-8 years ago, to be honest, I should hop into a time machine, go back and apologize for what I've done really bad at the time. Yeah, but I didn't know any better then. And also when you were talking about the story of how you worked in your dad's company, I think probably not only because he's your dad, but probably because he was also knowledgeable about how business works at the time. I think it was also okay to fail. And in a lot of companies, I don't see this culture of you can fail and learn from it to figure out what's really working. And I've seen successful Scrum mostly in environments where you had that backup from management. So I had to think back on my first experience with Scrum. At the time, I read one book from Roman Pichler, and then I was thrown into my first project. And after a few days, I was like, this is like the purest and most proper Scrum project ever, until I got a seasoned Scrum Master in there, which had a look at one of our sprint change days. And he pointed out all the areas of improvement, which I was not seeing at the time because I did not have that knowledge. Looking back, I know we made a lot of mistakes and some of them were really painful, but I don't remember a single point of time where any of the managers really got angry or was escalating. And it's not because we hit those errors, but it was a big multinational tech giant and not too old, so that maybe also helped. And they had a really open culture, and that enabled to make good experiences and also experiment with failure. So you've worked with some of the big companies as well in worldwide probably. What's your take on how important is dealing with failure and learning from it to be successful in Agile?
I mean, it's essential, right? We talk about transparency, inspection, adaptation. That's the three pillars of empiricism or empirical process control, where again, Scrum is, and the whole agility movement is based on. Now, I do believe there are cultures where this and by cultures, I don't mean like geographical cultures, right? Organizational cultures, where this might not resonate well. But I think this whole thing of failing and being allowed to fail is something where people are not courageous enough. What do I mean by that? I have rarely seen a manager, and I've worked in many organizations, where you approach that manager, and I do that frequently as an external consultant, right? They're like, how long is it going to take till we become like fully agile? Ever heard that question? Of course. And I always said, I don't know. And it was never that they were like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about because he doesn't know the answer. Although I'm brought in as an expert, right? Because I explained to them the reasons why I have this uncertainty. And based on that, right, if they ask a team, when is that product going to be ready? And I think if the team brings up the courage to really say, we don't know because of this and this and this and this, and some of these uncertainties can be addressed upfront, others can't. Most of those managers that I've met, at least, would say, all right, I understand. And now, so what is your plan on how to deal with that uncertainty, right? In what kind of time frames, we refer to those things as time boxes and then sprints, are you going to inspect and adapt of whether you're going to make that next deadline or not, right? But they don't start to having this conversation because nobody, and it starts out with the teams, is willing to say, we don't know. We don't know the answer to this. Now, if you don't say you don't know, you actually claim that you do know, right? But then don't deliver on that. Of course, the person on the other side will be disappointed. They're like, you told me you'll be delivering this by this time, within this cost, and at that quality. And none of these three things is here. Other than believing that you're incompetent, I don't know. I don't know what I should believe, right? But if you really put it out there, might be situations where they say, okay, I have the answer to this, so you should too. Now let me walk you through that. Then you learn something. But in most cases, people will say, okay, I understand. There's a lot of uncertainty, but have a structured approach of dealing with that uncertainty. And that could be using Scrum, could be something else, but have that approach.
Mm. Yeah, very good point. I remember a conversation I overheard at a client 5 years ago in the coffee kitchen. They were getting more and more agile, and I was working with the Scrum team building a completely new product. It was big fun at the time. And then I grabbed a coffee in the coffee kitchen, and two other people were talking just about random stuff until they got to the point where one asked the other, "Hey, have you heard about Project X? So where does it stand?" And they had this kind of stage gate process, which one might call still a little bit old fashioned, but hey, it was helpful to them. So not going to judge that particular tool. And the other person responded with, "Yeah, it made it to phase 2, and I haven't heard for another half a year, so it never got till gate 3. And gate 3 was the one where it got really expensive, because that was the decision where they put an entire team on it and started to really build something. Before there was a lot of analysis, market research, all important work which needs to happen if you develop a product. But the thing which really struck me at the time was when one person said, "Yeah, they probably failed." So it was seen as a failure that someone, and probably they would look at the project manager, quote unquote, who was not able to push it through the entire gate process. And I was sitting there like, wow, from what I would actually look for in an agile organization is to look at that as a big win. Like, we have identified that we are not onto something which is going to be successful, and we end that project before we start throwing a lot of money at it. And I think that's a mindset shift which is still not so easy to implement in companies, because of course, if you get a project as a team, as a project manager, you want to be successful, you believe in what you're doing, and it's probably going to hurt as well to figure out, yes, this is not going to happen. What do you think needs to change in companies so that this is rather seen as a win instead of a loss? Or do you see it differently? First of all.
No, absolutely. I think it's a win. I mean, knowing where you would sink your money and avoiding that would be great. And maybe even more important than sinking money would be sinking energy, right? Sinking your people's resources and all of that. So you would want to avoid that. Everybody wants to work on something, I believe, everybody, on something that's going to have an impact, that's going to make a change, that's going to be successful in whatever way you measure success within the organization. So identifying those things that don't would definitely be valuable for the org and for the people. Now, in terms of the mindset change, I think this, again, starts with talking about that we don't know necessarily things. Mm-hmm. Being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Because only if you say that, right, then your next step will be, as I don't know whether this product is going to be relevant to our users, I will start with an experiment. And if the experiment is successful, we will continue with the next experiment. Mm-hmm. If the experiment is not successful, we might pivot to another idea in order to deal with the same customer problem. Mm-hmm. Or we might say, hey, it's not worth our time and effort to solve for that customer problem. So we put our energy, our people, our money into other places. But if you don't start with that first thing, we are not sure. We don't know that this thing can actually solve the problem that we're trying to solve. You will not even go into this experimental mindset, right? And then you won't have the learning as well. So for me, that is the key. That is where we need to start. Mm.
And usually from my perspective or from my experience, the people who know that something is not going to work out first are the ones actually building it. So somehow we seem to have a barrier somewhere which prevents that information, depending on the size of your organization, to flow to the top. Yeah, where actually that decision would have to be made on, let's stop doing this. What do you think? What's the biggest challenge we have not tackled on a broad scale yet to make that flow of information and that flow of honesty, if you want to call it that, possible?
There's many things. So we mentioned one thing that the teams can do is to be very open and honest and say, we don't know, right? Now let's shift this, right? What can the managers do? What can those in like the higher positions within an organization do? I think when they get presented with an idea, with a proposal, one of the things they can do is, how do you know this is going to work?
Mm-hmm.
Just ask the question. What are the assumptions behind this? Just ask the question. Can you show me this on a business model canvas and explain to me the mechanics? Right? This could be a question. Now, when they put everything on that canvas in terms of a business model, just as an example, you can go and say, okay, how do you know that you can reach the customer through that channel? Maybe the team knows. Maybe they're like, oh, we don't know, actually. We thought we could. This is an assumption. All right, it's an assumption. So highlight it as an assumption. Right? How do you know you can sell this as a subscription service? Or whether you need to sell it as like lifetime access or whatever, right? They're like, oh, we don't know. We assumed because X does this and Y does this, we could do it too. Okay, there might be enough similarities in terms of the product offering and industry, or actually this is a completely different context. Customers are not used to, or we believe, not used to subscriptions. So how can we test this? But really asking that question, how do you know, if they pretend to know, is again very important. And again, many managers don't ask that question. And I don't know why. I have a hypothesis, which one is they don't ask that question because if the teams know the answer, the manager could look stupid for having asked that question.
Mm.
The second, it's a hypothesis, right? I don't know whether that's actually true. The other piece or the other hypothesis that I have is the manager is afraid of asking that question because if the team then says, we actually don't know, then it would be clear to everyone in that room, how are we going to make a plan the way that our organization expects it to be? Like set in stone, everybody's very determined. We all say, yes, we're going to nail this. How are we going to do that once we admit that we don't know? But I think it becomes, again, the topic of courage. It becomes the role of the managers, of the higher ups, whatever, to ask that question. How do you know? As a result, the manager will learn. As a result, the team will learn. And most likely, as a result, they will admit that they don't know everything, thus need to figure out a way where they can build up that knowledge, right? And we mentioned earlier, Agile is about dealing with uncertainty, reducing uncertainty. When you reduce uncertainty, you develop or you create new knowledge. Not a coincidence, by the way, that those two Japanese scientists who wrote the foundation for what later became Scrum and the new product development game called or named their book, which was then written after that paper, The Knowledge Creating Company. Because it's all about creating knowledge. And creating knowledge means you accept that there is knowledge to be created, which means you don't know it all. Right? Otherwise, why would you create knowledge?
Yeah, that's a good point. So that was an eye-opener for me as well when during my journey to become a certified Scrum trainer, one of my mentors phrased a sentence like, Scrum is a learning framework. And I really liked that. I hadn't looked at it from that perspective at the time. But yeah, I think that's one of the core strengths and definitely helps to get there. You mentioned...
One thing, now you mentioned it's a learning framework. It's also a habit-building framework.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Right? So going back to, you mentioned earlier, some people say it's so dogmatic. Now, why is it to some extent dogmatic? Why do you have the role of a Scrum Master to make sure that everybody works according to Scrum? Because you want people to build new habits.
And that's tough. That's tough too. There's a lot of analogies, and I think we both are very passionate about sports. So, and I know you use sports analogies in your trainings as well. 2 years ago, I even created a conference talk about it. And one thing which was really eye-opening, not that it was new, but that it's so similar, what was a revelation at the time for me, Pre-COVID, I had become really unfit because I was really in my habit of working, traveling, eating bad. And you know how it was before COVID when we had trainings in other countries, cities, wherever, and there was always a buffet and you could eat as much as you wanted. And it's a temptation. And I have to be honest, I couldn't resist very often. So my weight was off the charts for what I was used to. And then when COVID hit, I had time to exercise again and I got fit again. And at a certain point in time, I was fit again, but I had to keep these habits going because otherwise the pendulum would have gotten back to the other direction again. And I think that's one of the other points which kind of pays into that entire agile is not working, it's bad. It is tough work. And basically, it also means you will never stop doing it once you actually start doing it, if you really commit to doing it. So just because you have taught everyone on how Scrum works, how Agile works, you have done. And for me, if people ask, what's the most important meeting in Scrum? Or if someone would say, you have one event which you can visit from a Scrum team, which one would you visit? I think a few years ago, I would have said a retrospective. Nowadays, I would say, I want to see a sprint review. Because I want to see, are they getting feedback from anyone who's actually giving them valuable feedback? And what are they doing with it? Because that's the only point or the main point where I can assess, is learning actually happening? And are they able and maybe even allowed to act based on what they've learned? Yeah, and you don't stop doing that. The moment you stop doing that, other companies which don't stop will surpass you. And being fit, it was the same thing. So for a few years now, I really maintain these habits. Is it fun? Sometimes not. I'm not gonna lie about it. Yeah. So sometimes I'm in my basement doing some body weight exercises, and it really pisses me off. But I know why I'm doing it, because if I don't do it, I've been there before. I don't want to get there anymore. And I think that's what makes Agile also tough, because it is not always fun, but to be professionally successful sometimes means also doing the stuff which needs to be done and not only doing the fun stuff.
Yeah, there is this great Mike Tyson quote.
Oh yeah,
he has many. I love this guy.
I always call him the American philosopher Mike Tyson. It's always good for some laughs.
I come back to the quote that I wanted to share. I share one before that. I mean, my most loved quote from Mike Tyson is, "Everybody has a plan until you punch them in the mouth."
Yeah, mine too.
And every startup founder has experienced this. Like, you're like, "Oh, this is going to be amazing. Oh, let's build this." And you go to a first cut, they're like, punch in the mouth. But what I wanted to say, it's about the discipline piece. And Mike Tyson said, discipline is doing what you hate to do in a way as if you love doing it, right? It's very important. And I think anybody that wants to do anything that's excellent over a long period of time needs discipline. It doesn't work the other way. If you look at the best actors in the world, highly disciplined. If you look at the best athletes in the world, right? Highly disciplined. If you look at the best leaders, managers in the world, highly disciplined. And Agile, what I believe, especially a framework like Scrum, right, that then helps you become more agile, is all about discipline. And I would still pick the retrospective as the one meeting if I had one, because in the retrospective, it might come up, or it should come up, hey, this past few sprints, we didn't seek feedback from our customers. So how do we know we're still building the right thing, and not only the things in the right way, right? But both of them, right? Review and retro, both inspect and adapt them are like at the core of this. And this is exactly where, unfortunately, I see most organizations don't do it well. You were earlier explaining, and I just wrote for me a note, people don't do it well. Because when I teach people, especially those that seem to have experience, then you teach it to them, they're like, yeah, we do a review, but we don't have customers in there. That's not a review, right? Or they say, we do a retro, but we do it once a quarter, right? Or we do a retro and we add everything that comes up
Oh, yeah,
to
totally.
our improvement backlog.
Good
And
one.
then you ask them, what's the quote unquote velocity on that improvement backlog? They're like, it's zero, right? And that's the thing. So the difficult piece are exactly those events where people come together, where they have an honest conversation. What has been going on, right? What was good? What was not so good? How can we make this better?
Yeah.
And you don't aim for that one big thing, right? The Japanese call that one big thing, the big jump, the kaikaku. It's great if it happens, but what you aim for is the kaizen, the tiny little change that add up, right? And then you basically have the same thing as compounding interest. If you do it over a long period of time, emphasis is on a long period of time. Because the same way you don't become fit overnight, you're not going to have a great team overnight. The same way you fall back to old habits or bad habits that make you unfit, a team that doesn't get the support they need falls back into bad habits and not asking for feedback and not continuously improving. So this is where that whole discipline thing comes in. And my favorite analogy for a scrum master is never like the shepherd's dog or whatever. It's always been the personal trainer. Right? My personal trainer always used to say to me, go hard or go home. Right? And the moment he said that, of course, I never went home because this would have just been an embarrassment, right? So I always went hard in the training session. But every day, every time I came there, he's like, Sohrab, go hard or go home. I'm like, go hard. And then he's like, good. So let's start. And I
So,
think that's something that a great Scrum Master could do. And to your point, and then I'll end, what is it that most teams don't have? It's a great Scrum Master. And that's why those teams or those people believe Agile is dead, because again, going back to our first point, they've never experienced it well. It's as simple as that from my perspective.
yeah, and it takes time to so many information. So it takes time to become a good Scrum Master as well, right? So visiting a certified Scrum Master training is a first step. It's like the bare minimum for me to even have the chance to be successful, to understand what everything's all about. But then it takes a lot of effort to educate yourself, to network, to grow, to fail, to experiment, and try out things. I totally agree. And the discipline part, I like that we have so many sports analogies. So yeah, I've done track and field in the days, and we had one competitor. We were really close friends, even though we were always competing. It's not a team sport, so it's one person winning usually, and we were battling each other and high jumping all the time. And he had a T-shirt from his club, which he self-made, "Go hard or go home." That really reminded me of that one. So he was like you. He did it sequentially. He first went hard and then he went home
Exactly.
to recover. And then he came back even stronger. Yeah. And that's really a key point, that discipline. And it is hard. Even in sports, it's hard. But also there you have these success cases. Like, you can think of him personally, whatever you want, but Cristiano Ronaldo, he has, for me, perfectionized that discipline, the way he lives and the way he executes. And I'm not saying I could do that, probably not. And there's also, and I won't judge any other soccer player who says like, yeah, I want to have a drink every now and then. I want to go celebrate. That's your choice. But I think you can very clearly see what the success of being really 100% dedicated and disciplined can bring to you. And I think that's the same in business as well, and with Scrum teams as well. And we have seen them. And there are companies which execute it in a really good way. It's not always easy. It's not always fun, but you can be better than others. And I think it's really going to be interesting for some companies we have in our area that have been around for very long. They've gone through the entire industrial revolution. They were really successful because of the old ways of management, all fair enough. And it's really going to be interesting on how disciplined will they be when they need to change now, especially looking at the automotive sector in Germany. That's going to be interesting, I think.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Cristiano Ronaldo. It's incredible. He had this one interview where there was Coca-Cola in front of him
Oh yeah.
because, like, the sponsor of, I think it was the World Cup, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken, and he puts it away and says water only. And that was so good because, like, every time that my son, he wants to be a football player. I'm like, you need to think about your diet. He's like, yeah, just like Cristiano. I'm like, just like Cristiano. But there's so many other examples of people, athletes that are based on their age, long past their prime, like LeBron James. I think he just turned 39 or something like that.
Ibrahimovic.
But they're like, oh my God, like, what are they delivering? Like on a night to night, day to day, whatever basis. And this is again a testament to their discipline. Now, one thing that you had mentioned, I forgot it. I actually forgot what your last point was.
So it must have been a very wise point, obviously.
Yeah, it must have been a very wise point. No, I think it was after you talked about the athletes. I forgot to take a note. Doesn't matter. If it comes back, I'll share it.
And I think we need to look a bit at the time. So we're close to our 1 hour mark already. And we started with, is Agile dead? We talked a lot about why we think it is not and what the secret to being successful with it is. And if I wrap it up, it's, first of all, experience it properly once seems to be one of the key points that helps you get successful with Agile as well. And the other one, if I pick just two, is sticking to it, being disciplined, allowing people to learn and fail and not give up easy.
Yeah. And part of that discipline piece is get great Scrum Masters in. And sometimes when I say this, the companies think, oh, he's just saying this so that he can sell us Scrum Masters. I just say, no, I don't want to sell you Scrum Masters. We don't even have people on staff that could do that intentionally. I never wanted to have like a big consultancy where we sell hundreds of Scrum Masters to our clients. This is a capability you need to build internally, right? Again, going back to, are we going to see less or more uncertainty going forward? Is there going to be less or more need for the ability to deal with change and uncertainty? And if the answer is we're going to see more uncertainty, and the ability to deal with that needs to be stronger, then every organization, I think, needs to build those internal capabilities, having great Scrum Masters. I was just, before our conversation, Jan, I was on the call with the CEO of a supermarket chain in Eastern Europe. And they had just gone through a 1-week training with one of our coaches, went really well. And he was like, Sohrab, I want to now follow up on your recommendation. We need to build this capability in-house. And I've assigned one of my top leaders, right? We will free her up of every responsibility she has today. She will basically become the chief agilist internally. So first, she needs to build that capability. She needs to become a master of those things so that she can then support everybody else in the organization. But we need that internal, yes, that's exactly what we need. And I believe every organization should follow through on that. And of course, people like us can support as part of that process. But ultimately, those capabilities need to be within the organization, especially once you have a certain size as a company. And those big companies with 10,000s of people, they need that internally. And now the point comes back to me. I wanted to say, we talked about excellence, right? Anything great you want to achieve requires excellence. Those companies that were actually excellent in the old days, because they were running extremely efficient, they were really good at developing their people, I'm not afraid. I think they will make that turn, right? They will build the new set of capabilities. It will take them some time, but they will do it. They will do it well. I'm more scared for those companies that are not even excellent in the old way of working, but are big due to certain advantages they had at certain points, like monopolies, being state-owned, etc. because they're not good at the old way of working and they won't be good at the new way of working. I believe they would probably need a fundamental shift within their company to learn what excellence is all about. And no matter whether it's traditional project management or agile, you're going to need discipline. You're going to need excellence. Now, once you have that culture of excellence, of demanding and delivering on excellence, then I believe you can succeed in both ways. And you can actually build those capabilities hand in hand, like the ambidextrous organization. But if you don't have that demand for excellence, you'll be out. It's just a question of time. And this is sadly happening to the German automotive industry. They haven't had excellence for a long time. My take.
Could be, yeah. And you raised another topic, maybe one for one of our next conversations. What's the benefits of having internal versus external Scrum Masters? That's definitely something we could talk about. But I think we're going to wrap up our session today. And if you listened until now, we thank you for doing that. We hope it was of any value. And please let us know what other topics are on your mind or which you would like to hear our takes on. And maybe we'll talk about that next time.
Absolutely. Jan, thanks. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.